Welcome back to the deep dive. I want you to do something for me right now if you can.
Yeah, get comfortable first.
Right. If you are in a safe place, maybe sitting in your favorite chair or just lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I want you to just close your eyes for a second.
Just for a second.
Imagine, if you will, a campfire. It's late, the fire's crackling, sending those little orange sparks drifting up into a pitch black sky.
That is a very specific vibe.
It is, but stick with me. It's quiet. You're staring into the flames, mesmerized by that shifting light, and you start asking those really big late-night questions.
The ones that keep you up.
Exactly. Not just, what's for dinner tomorrow, or did I remember to lock the front door? I'm talking about the heavy stuff, like what actually is tomorrow?
Wow.
Or even better, is tomorrow already happening somewhere else entirely?
Okay, yeah. That is the classic late-night existential crisis setting right there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the kind of conversation you only really have at like 2 in the morning when the veil between reality and imagination feels, well, a little thin.
A little thin, yeah. And that is precisely the relaxed, maybe slightly chilling, but ultimately fun vibe we are channeling today.
I love it.
Because we are cracking open a very specific moment in time to try and understand the actual nature of time itself. And when I say specific, I mean we have the literal receipts for this one.
We absolutely do.
We are looking at a document that freezes a moment in history to explain how history actually works. We are diving into session 227 of the early sessions, book 5 of the Seth material.
Which, for context, was recorded on January 26, 1966.
Right, January 26, 1966, a Wednesday night, 9:00 p.m., just a couple of people, Jane Roberts and her husband Ruburt Butts, sitting in a living room in Elmira, New York.
Which sounds so ordinary.
Completely ordinary, but think about the context here. I mean, the Beatles are dominating the charts, the Cold War is freezing everyone's nerves, and in this unassuming, quiet front room, 2 people are about to have their minds entirely blown by a disembodied personality named Seth.
It really is a striking contrast.
It is. Now, before we strike the match and light this campfire properly, I do have to give our standard mandatory disclaimer. This deep dive is distributed free of charge on all major platforms for educational purposes.
We aren't selling you a new timeline today.
No, at least not yet. We are strictly here to impartially explore the material and see what it has to offer.
And our mission today is to tackle one of the heaviest, honestly most mind-bending concepts Seth ever laid out. We are getting into the idea of probable selves and what he calls the limitation of the ego.
The hook here is honestly terrifying and liberating at the exact same time.
Yeah, it really is.
Because the premise is that the life you are living right now, like this specific timeline where you are listening to us, where you made that specific cup of coffee this morning, where you wore those exact shoes, it is just one of an infinite number of what Seth calls event X's.
Event X, right, just one that you could have chosen.
Yes. And the kicker is, somewhere else, a different version of you chose differently.
And that version is just as real, just as solid, and just as conscious as you are sitting here right now.
It's wild to think about. But, and here's where it gets really fun, despite this being a massive, heavy metaphysical download about the nature of reality, this particular session features a very funny, very physical interruption.
By a cat.
By a cat named Willy.
It is just the perfect grounding element.
Yeah.
You have the literal secrets of the multiverse being explained, and it's interrupted by a house cat who just wants a lap to sit on. It really puts the human in human experience.
It totally does. So let's set the scene properly for this.
Yeah.
It's January 26, 1966. Jane Roberts and her husband Rob are in that front room. 9 p.m., Jane enters her trance state. Now, for anyone new to this material, Jane doesn't just close her eyes and talk in her normal voice.
No, it's profound physical transformation.
Right.
The notes from Rob describe her eyes closing, then opening frequently. Her voice completely changes. It starts off kind of average, maybe a bit slow, but then it picks up speed and emphasis.
It gets heavier.
It becomes incredibly dynamic. It's deeper. It has a completely different cadence. At that point, she isn't Jane anymore. She is the conduit for Seth.
So she is effectively gone from the room. Seth is in the driver's seat. And he starts off by saying he wants a relaxed session. He's pleased with the work they did previously. He's setting a very chill tone.
He wants to talk about the nature of time in a calm, collected way.
And then enter the chaos agent.
Willy the cat.
Yes, tell us about the cat incident, because this paints such a vivid picture of what it was actually like to be in that living room.
So right in the middle of this profound explanation of time, I mean, Seth is literally mid-sentence getting into the mechanics of the ego,
Hmm.
and Willy jumps right up onto Jane's lap.
Just right in the middle of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, Jane is dissociated. She is not there in the normal conscious sense.
Mm-hmm.
But Willy is a cat. He doesn't care about interdimensional channeling. He starts doing that thing cats do, kneading.
Making biscuits.
Making biscuits, yes. He is digging his claws into her legs. Rhythmic, sharp pressure. Right? Normally, if a cat digs its claws into your leg, you react. You yelp, you move, you push the cat away.
You do something.
But Jane is in a deep trance.
Mm.
Rob's notes say her eyes didn't even open. She didn't say ouch. But her delivery, Seth's delivery, became what Rob describes as spasmodic.
Spasmodic. I really love that description. It's like the signal was getting fuzzy because the hardware, Jane's body, was getting poked by tiny needles.
That's exactly it. The biological machine was reacting to the pain, causing the voice to stutter or jerk. But the consciousness driving the machine, Seth, was just trying to push through the interference.
Until Rob finally has to intervene.
Yep. Eventually, Rob, her husband, has to get up, lift Willy off her lap, and drop him to the floor.
And what's really fascinating is the context Seth gives for this right after, because apparently in the early sessions, Willy was terrified of Seth.
Oh, absolutely terrified. Rob's notes mentioned that early on, the cat would hide. He would literally panic.
Just from her going into trance?
Yeah. Seth explains that the cat's acute senses could detect the arrival of this other personality. The cat felt the shift in vibration, the physical change in the room's energy, and it just freaked him out. It was basically like a ghost entering the room for him.
But now, over a year later, Willy is so used to the trance state vibration that he just treats Seth like living room furniture.
Seth literally says the cat is now accustomed to his presence. Such a funny evolution. From, oh no, there is a ghost in my owner, to, well, the ghost has a warm lap, and I'm going to sit on it.
Huh. I just love the image of a multidimensional entity explaining the deepest secrets of the universe, essentially being defeated, or at least heavily inconvenienced, by a cat wanting attention.
It definitely anchors the whole experience.
It reminds us that this high-level philosophy is coming through a living, breathing human body. It isn't happening on some pristine mountaintop. It's happening on a sofa with a needy pet.
Exactly.
Okay, so Rob moves the cat. Jane's delivery smooths out, her eyes open, and they are described as being very dark at this point, and she lights a cigarette.
Back to business.
All right, Seth gets down to business. He starts talking about the ego versus the whole self, and this is where we really need to put our thinking caps on.
This is the absolute core of the session.
Yeah.
Seth introduces this concept of event X.
Let's unpack event X, because the way we usually think about time, the way I experience it, is just a straight line. I wake up, I have coffee, I go to work, event A, event B, event C.
It feels completely continuous.
It feels continuous. Yeah, it feels inevitable.
Right, and that is exactly how the ego perceives it. Seth says the ego acts kind of like a spotlight that can only focus on one single thing at a time. It operates in strict continuity.
It needs a story.
It needs a story that makes sense. First this happened, then that happened. So the ego arrives at a moment of choice. Let's call that moment event X.
Okay, event X. Let's make it concrete. Let's say event X is I choose to drink coffee.
Okay, Seth says that event X is just one of a literally numberless amount of probable events. Before you actually experience it, event X is no more real than event Y, which might be drinking tea, or event Z, skipping breakfast entirely.
They are all just hovering there.
They are just potentials. They are all sitting there equally in the field of possibilities.
So until I actually pick up the mug and take a sip of the coffee, drinking the coffee and not drinking the coffee are equal.
Precisely equal. They are equal in weight, equal in potential. Seth says, and I'm quoting the session directly here, it becomes real, actual, and different from those other probable events only when it is experienced by our conscious self.
Okay, so it is the act of observation, the actual act of living it, that makes it real to us.
To the ego,
Yeah.
that distinction is vital.
Right.
The ego locks onto event X and says, okay, this is reality. I drank the coffee. And because the ego can only see that one single line, it naturally assumes the event Y and event Z, the tea and the skipping breakfast, just disappeared.
That they are unreal.
Exactly, that they're just what-ifs, phantoms.
Just if I go to a restaurant and choose the salad, the reality where I ordered the steak is just gone. It never happened.
And that is exactly where Seth stops us and says, no, that is the ego's illusion. He argues that if event X wasn't perceived by the ego, it would remain a probability. But just because your ego focused on X doesn't mean Y and Z didn't happen.
This is the part that melts my brain a bit. Because if I didn't drink the tea, who did?
Seth explains that while the ego is limited to that one single track, there is another portion of the self, which he calls the whole self, or the inner self, that does not have that limitation at all.
Okay.
When you, the ego, choose event X, this other part of you essentially branches off and experiences event X1, X2, X3.
So somewhere, a literal version of me did eat the steak. A version of me did move to Chicago instead of staying here. A version of me actually said, I love you instead of staying silent.
Yes, and not just in a theoretical, sci-fi multiverse way where it's a billion light years away in another dimension. Seth implies this is happening simultaneously right now in the exact same amount of physical time.
That is staggering.
The whole self is expanding into all these probabilities at once.
Yeah. But how? I mean, functionally, how can one entity process all of that? I can barely process my one single life on a Tuesday. I get overwhelmed just deciding what to watch on a streaming service. How can the whole self live 1,000 entire lives at once?
Seth knows how crazy that sounds to the ego, so he uses a really specific, brilliant analogy to explain how we can process all this without just completely short-circuiting. He calls it the handshake.
Let's walk through the handshake analogy, because this is the part that really made it click for me.
Okay, imagine you are shaking someone's hand. To your conscious mind, your ego, it is one simple, singular action. I shook his hand. You file it away of one single event.
Right, one event, simple, done.
But physically, biologically, subconsciously, what actually just happened? Think about the mechanics of it. Your brain had to send signals down the spine to the shoulder to lift the arm. It had to extend the elbow.
It had to rotate the wrist.
It had to open the finger.
It had to judge the physical distance so I didn't just whiff and miss the person's hand entirely.
Exactly. It had to coordinate literally millions of nerve impulses. It had to adjust your blood pressure so you didn't pass out from the sudden movement.
Wow.
It had to process the sensory input, the skin texture of the other person, the temperature of their hand, the firmness of their grip. And then it had to instantly adjust your own grip so you didn't crush their hand or hold it like a wet noodle.
If I actually had to consciously think, okay, contract bicep, extensor digitorum, adjust grip pressure to 15 psi, I would never get the handshake done. I'd be completely paralyzed.
Exactly. You perceive the whole action, but you are not consciously aware of the millions of small individual actions that make it up. But they exist.
They really happen.
They're completely real. Your nerves really did fire. Your muscles really did contract. But you process them instantly and subconsciously. You condense all that massive complexity into a single smooth experience.
And Seth is saying the inner self handles entire probable lives the exact same way we handle those tiny muscle movements.
Yes. That is the scale shift he's trying to get us to understand. He says this other portion of the self experiences these probable events, these other lives, with as much rapidity as you subconsciously perceive the million small actions that make up the handshake.
That makes me feel incredibly small and incredibly huge at the exact same time.
It really redefines the idea of efficiency. The ego is just the user interface that keeps things simple for you. I shook a hand, I drank coffee.
Right.
The inner self is the vast operating system in the background, processing millions of lines of code to make that simple icon appear on your screen. But in this case, the code is entire alternate timelines.
So the me that chose the tea instead of the coffee is just a muscle twitch to the whole self.
Basically, yes. A necessary experience muscle twitch.
So if we have all these other selves running around doing the things we didn't do, living these incredibly full, rich lives that are just muscle twitches to the big guy, why don't we bump into them?
That's the natural next question.
Yeah, why don't I get confused about which life I'm in? Why is my daily reality so incredibly stable?
Seth moves right into another analogy to explain this separation. The family unit.
I really like this one because it makes it feel a lot less sci-fi and much more, I don't know, domestic. It brings it back down to the living room level.
He says to compare the various portions of the self, these probable selves, to members of a single family. You have the father, the mother, and the children.
Okay, let's break that down.
The father is at his office in the city. That is his domain for the day. That is dimension A. The mother is at home in the country. That is dimension B. The children are at school. Dimension C.
So they are all different people in different places doing entirely different things. The dad is in a board meeting. The mom is out gardening. The kid is taking a math test.
But they are all one family. They operate out of the same house, eventually, which represents the whole self. Now, Seth points out a very important detail. Is there a literal physical wall preventing the child from going to the father's office?
Physically, no. I mean, the kid could just walk out of school, take a train into the city, and walk right into the office building.
Right. There is no fundamental, impenetrable barrier.
Yeah.
But the child doesn't go there. It isn't their domain. They wouldn't understand the work being done in the boardroom anyway. It isn't their reality for the day. They have their own focus at school.
So in this analogy, I am the child at school. I think the school is the only reality because that is where my ego is currently focused.
Exactly.
But the father, which is another part of me, another probable self, is at the office living a completely different set of experiences.
Exactly. And while they don't physically interfere with each other constantly, you don't usually see the dad sitting in the third-grade classroom, they do share a bond.
The connection.
Seth calls it an unspecialized, extremely generalized, and intuitional knowledge.
Like a family vibe.
Yes, think about how close families actually work. If the father has a terrible, incredibly stressful day at work, even if he doesn't call home to complain, the mother might feel a sudden, unexplained drop in her mood.
Right.
Or if the child gets hurt on the playground at school, the parent at the office might get a sudden, sharp pang of worry out of nowhere.
The telepathic link.
Seth says the different parts of the self share that telepathic or intuitive link. They bleed into each other emotionally, even if they stay in their own physical lanes.
So that sudden mood swing I have for absolutely no reason on a Tuesday afternoon, that day where I just feel inexplicably sad, or conversely, inexplicably happy.
Could very well be your cousin self or brother self in another probability having a really bad or really great time. You're picking up the family gossip on a subconscious frequency.
That explains so much about human emotion. But also, it is pretty wild to think about. We are basically haunted by our own potentials.
Haunted is definitely one way to put it. Supported is another. Seth says these joint experiences actually reinforce the identity of the whole psychological structure.
How so?
Well, we aren't just isolated, lonely fragments drifting around. We are a collective. We are a team. Even if you feel totally alone in your specific event X, you have a whole squad gaining experience in the other probabilities.
Okay, so normally we stay in our lanes. The kid stays at school, the dad stays at the office. We maintain our separate ego realities. But do the lanes ever actually cross? Do we ever accidentally walk into the wrong room of the house?
This is where the session takes a turn that I find genuinely chilling. This is the part that feels like a psychological thriller.
Yeah, this part actually gave me goosebumps when I read it. Seth stops talking about happy families and starts talking about breakdowns.
He starts describing what happens during severe psychological shock or deep, unendurable futility.
Unendurable futility. That is such a heavy phrase.
It is heavy. It's describing a state when the ego hits a solid brick wall.
Mm.
When the reality you are living becomes so painful or so incredibly stuck or so devoid of meaning that the ego simply cannot process it anymore. It literally cannot go forward.
A short circuit.
Yes, a short circuit. He says that when the psychological pressure gets too high in one specific track, when the ego just cannot handle the reality it has built, it can cause a short circuit.
Yeah.
And in that exact moment, the portion of the self experiencing this reality switches.
It jumps tracks.
Seth specifically points to cases of sudden amnesia. We have all heard those bizarre stories.
Right.
Someone disappears, and 3 years later, they are found living in a different town with a completely different name, a different job, and absolutely zero memory of who they were before.
And we usually think of that as, a brain injury or a fugue state. We think, oh, their brain snapped and just invented a brand new persona to cope.
Seth offers a much wilder explanation. He says, and I quote, "In some such cases, the individual is experiencing a probable event. But he must experience it, you see, within his own time system."
Wait, so the person didn't just forget who they were. They literally swapped consciousness into a probable self.
It implies that the you in that other town, let's call him Bob, was already there. Bob was a probable self, already living his life as a mechanic in Ohio.
Okay.
When the you in this life, let's call him Steve, the banker in New York, hit an absolute dead end of unendurable futility, Steve's consciousness jumped the gap. Steve took over the avatar of Bob.
But because the ego can only see one line at a time, like the spotlight we talked about earlier.
Right, it edits out the transition entirely. The ego cannot reconcile the thought, I was a banker in New York named Steve, with the reality, I am a mechanic in Ohio named Bob. The dissonance would break the mind.
So it wipes the slate.
Exactly. Amnesia isn't a bug in the brain, it is a feature of the transition mechanism. It is the consciousness's way of maintaining continuity when the continuity has actually been violently broken.
That is deeply terrifying. It means the solid walls between these realities are so much thinner than we think. We are just one unendurable shock away from becoming a complete stranger.
Or, to flip it to a more positive light, We are one shock away from escaping a fatal dead end. It is a radical survival mechanism for the whole self. If one branch of the tree is dying, the consciousness is grafted onto another healthy branch. It is self-preservation on a multidimensional level.
That is actually a beautiful way to look at it. Survival of the spirit. This soul refuses to just be trapped in a dead end.
Exactly. But Seth doesn't just leave us with his high-level philosophy. He knows the human mind needs proof.
We are skeptical by nature.
We are. He knows we cannot just take his word for it that we have mechanic versions of ourselves running around in Ohio. We need something tactile, something we can verify.
Right. It is incredibly easy to talk about dimensions and probable selves because nobody can fact-check it. It is much harder to prove it in the room. So right in the middle of this session, Seth does one of his validity checks.
The Dr. In-Stream test.
Who exactly was Dr. In-Stream?
He was a researcher, a psychologist, I believe, that Jane and Rob were in correspondence with. Seth would often do these remote viewing experiments to prove he could perceive physical matter at a vast distance. He would describe what people were doing in other cities in real time.
So in the middle of this high-concept physics lecture about time and amnesia, Seth literally pauses and says, "Let me tell you what is sitting on this guy's desk right now."
And the detail he provides is incredibly specific. He doesn't just say, "Oh, I see books or some papers." He lists items that have distinct shape, color, and weight.
Let's go through that list because it's fascinating.
Okay, he says he sees a rather old-fashioned desktop, and on it, a green blotter.
A green blotter. Okay, a very specific color to call out.
Then he says a letter opener shaped like a dagger.
Again, a very specific visual. Not just a generic knife, but a dagger shape.
Right. Then a silver metal object. And then this one is my favorite, a glass globe that is heavier than it looks.
Heavier than it looks. That is such an interesting detail. That implies he is sensing the physical density, the mass of the object, not just looking at a flat remote picture. He is feeling the object remotely.
Exactly. He's interacting with its properties. He also mentions initials. He says there are visitors with the initials MW or WM, and that the M name is long with 2 R's in it.
And then he does what I can only describe as a vibe check.
Yes. He senses a grim occasion.
Which is a really interesting tonal shift. He sees the physical objects, the dagger, the globe, the blotter, but he also senses the emotional atmosphere in that distant room. A grim occasion.
Why do you think Seth does this? Why break the incredible flow of the session for a parlor trick about a desk?
It has to be about building trust, right?
Exactly. It's about establishing baseline credibility. If he can accurately describe a dagger-shaped letter opener in a house miles away, something Jane and Rob can literally call Dr. In-Stream and verify the next day, then you are much more likely to trust him when he describes the inevitable structure of the multiverse.
Because you can't verify the multiverse as easily.
Right. It is the handshake analogy again, in a way. I can see the small, verifiable details, the green blotter, the muscle twitches, so trust me on the big picture.
He is demonstrating that his consciousness is not bound by physical space, just as he claims it is not bound by linear time. And speaking of small details leading to massive things, the session wraps up with a really interesting discussion about Jane's own personal life. Specifically, her sudden, almost manic burst of poetry.
Yes. The notes mention Jane wrote an entire book of poetry in just a few days leading up to this specific session.
It is a staggering amount of outpouring. The notes give a precise timeline. On Friday, January 21st, she wrote 10 poems in about 3 hours.
10 poems in 3 hours. That is a poem every 18 minutes. That is a flow state on absolute steroids.
And it didn't stop. Monday, 20 poems in 6 hours. Tuesday, 15 poems. Wednesday, the actual day of the session, 7 more poems. She basically downloaded a complete book in less than a week.
And Seth connects this creative explosion directly back to the whole self concept. He doesn't just pat her on the back and say, "Good job." He analyzes the underlying energy mechanics of what just happened to her.
He says she used suggestion to access an abundance of energy, but more importantly, he talks about spontaneity.
Spontaneity. That word comes up a lot in Seth's broader work.
He says, and again I'm quoting, "The spontaneity that allowed him to deviate from his usual schedule is largely responsible for the whole book."
Wait, him?
Yes. Seth refers to Jane as Ruburt and uses male pronouns. That is an entirely separate deep dive. It relates to the male aspect of her larger psyche, according to Seth. But yes, in this context, he is talking about Jane.
Got it. So by stepping out of her rigid ego schedule, the straight line of I must do laundry at this time, I must cook dinner at this time, she tapped into that vast reservoir of energy that the whole self possesses.
Exactly. The ego loves its schedules, it loves predictability and continuity, but the whole self loves spontaneity. When Jane finally let go of the rigid daily schedule, she opened the tap. The energy that usually goes into maintaining the strict walls between selves was suddenly available for pure creativity.
And the incredibly funny origin story of this massive poetry book loops us right back to the beginning of our deep dive.
The cat.
The cat.
Yes. Seth reveals that Jane's original intention was merely to write a few humorous verses for a cat lover's birthday.
So this entire profound, interdimensional creative burst, and maybe even the vibrant energy of this very session, was catalyzed by a simple desire to write funny poems about cats.
It is the absolute perfect Seth lesson. The profound and the playful are not opposites. They are the exact same energy. You have the grim occasion of Dr. Instream and the cat lover's birthday of Jane. You have the infinite architecture of probable selves, and you have Willy the cat kneading on Jane's lap.
It is all one reality.
It is all one multidimensional family.
It really shows that you don't need to isolate yourself on a mountaintop or in a monastery to find enlightenment or tap into universal energy. You just need to follow your own spontaneity, even if it's just deciding to write a silly poem about a cat. That silly poem might be the exact key that unlocks a door to the whole self.
So let's bring this all back to you, the listener. We have talked about Eventex, the handshake, the family analogy, the amnesia glitch, the green blotter. What does this actually mean for us tomorrow, driving to work or just doing the dishes?
I think it fundamentally changes how you view choice. We so often get paralyzed by decision-making anxiety. What if I make the wrong choice? What if I take the wrong job? What if I miss out on my true path?
The fear of the unlived life. The terror that we are somehow ruining our one and only shot at happiness.
Right. And Seth is telling us, you don't miss out. You, the ego, take one path, but the you, the whole self, takes them all. The experience is gathered regardless. The growth happens. Those other paths you mourn are actually being walked right now by other versions of you who are just as real and just as capable.
It takes so much pressure off the daily grind. If I choose the salad, the steak is still enjoyed by my probable self somewhere else. We both win. The larger family wins.
And it suggests that we are never truly alone in our struggles. If we are like that family, the child at school, the father at the office, then even when we feel entirely isolated in our little schoolroom, we are being supported by the vast energy of the rest of the family.
We have backup, literal multidimensional backup.
And we have intuition. Think about that sudden hunch you get, that unexpected urge to do something totally different. It might just be a message from the office, a signal from a probable self saying, hey, try this route. I tried the other way, and it really didn't work out.
So listen to the hunches. They might be important memos from the home office.
And watch out for the glitches.
Huh, right. If you wake up in a different town tomorrow, don't panic. You just had a short circuit. Just roll with the new probability.
Or at least try to enjoy the new timeline you find yourself in. You are there for a reason. Your whole self put you there.
Before we wrap this up, I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to chew on tonight. We talked about how massive, unendurable traumatic shock can cause a consciousness to jump to a probable self. But what about the really small moments?
The micro shifts.
Exactly. Have you ever had a moment of deja vu that was so intense it actually felt like a physical memory? Or a day where you walked into your own house and it just felt strange, like the furniture was moved an inch to the left or the light was hitting the wall at an angle you've never seen before?
Or a conversation with a close friend where they remember an event completely differently than you do.
Right.
And they are absolutely adamant that their version is the truth.
Right. Did you just brush against a probable self in that moment? Did you just merge lanes for a split second? Did you just swap places with a cousin in the multidimensional family over something as simple as choosing tea instead of coffee?
It is a question that definitely makes you pay a lot more attention to the tiny details of your day. It makes you look at the green blotters on your own desk a little differently.
It certainly does. Now, we have obviously only scratched the surface of what Seth has to say about reality. This was just one single session, session 227. There are literally volumes of this material.
Volumes upon volumes. And honestly, the true complexity and beauty of this material is best experienced by reading the full sessions yourself. Seth's voice, even just written in text, has a unique rhythm and a density that we can only attempt to summarize here. There's a palpable energy in the words themselves.
So please, If this discussion sparks that curiosity in you, go directly to the source. We want to explicitly credit the Seth material and the publisher, New Awareness Network.
You can find all the books, including the early sessions book 5, where this specific session comes from, right at their website.
That website is sethcenter.com/the-early sessions. Go there, buy the books, support the ongoing preservation of this incredible material. It really is a treasure trove of insight.
It is a deep dive that never actually ends. There's always another layer.
And hey, watch out for house cats interrupting your interdimensional travel. They seem to be the true guardians of the gateway.
Oh, they just really want to be fed.
It's probably both. Hey, thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone.
Good evening.